Dr. Jason Fung. Follow a diet that has stood the test of time, not the corrupted low-fat fad. From the Valuetainment podcast on YouTube, November 4th, 2020.
I think the best thing to do is use a bit of common sense, and you have to think and you have to look through the test of time. So if something has withstood the test of time, then you know it's fairly decent advice. Okay, so you look back at the 70s, and I always choose the 70s because this is a time where there's not a lot of there's not widespread hunger in the United States. It's fairly advanced. But there's at the same time that there's relative availability of food, there's no obesity. And the question is why? Like, what did they do differently then compared to what we're doing now? And of course, the big change came in 1977, which was the change to eat a very low fat diet, right? So in 1977, the dietary guidelines for Americans came out, and all of a sudden, all of us were told that we should eat less fat, was the equivalent of telling people to eat more refined carbohydrates. So if you look back at the first food pyramid, at the bottom of the pyramid, there's bread and there's rice and there's potatoes, and it's like eat 7 or 8 servings a day sort of thing, right? 7 to 11, I think, servings a day. And it's like, well, who thinks eating 7 slices of white bread a day is slimming? Like, it's not very slimming, because now we look back and say, okay, well, eating a bunch of French fries and potato chips and, bread is not very good. And you can say, well, those are all refined foods as well, but that's what was on the pictures, right? Was the white bread and so on. So you have to say, okay, well, that was one of the big changes that happened. So if we simply go back to a more traditional way of eating, are we going to be able to sort of regain this sort of effortless maintenance of our weight? And you'd have to say, well, that's probably true. So this sort of whole low fat thing that came out of the 1970s was the big change. Prior to that, of course, people ate fat, they ate cheese, they eat eggs and all this sort of stuff. And it's interesting because, again, if you look at the big scientific data of the time, in the 70s, people ate 3 times a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And by the 2004, when you look at the big surveys, most Americans were eating closer to 6 times a day. So breakfast snack, lunch snack, dinner snack. So again, big changes in both what we ate and when we ate.
Low-fat diets were the big change in the 1970s. We had changed what we ate to low-fat. And when we ate 6 times a day, these led to overall obesity increases.
Now, they were related in some sense. That is, people who are eating a lot of refined carbohydrates, if you ate steak and eggs in the morning, you're pretty full until lunchtime. If you ate 2 slices of white bread and jam, you're sort of ravenous by 10:30 and looking for a low-fat muffin. So people started eating much more frequently. So the thing is that what I'm talking about mostly is going back to sort of a 1970s style diet, which of course people had been eating all the way prior to that, which is not a low fat diet, which is basically eating natural foods, eating the fat. Like, this whole thing about eating low fat, cutting out the butter and cutting out the cream and stuff, that didn't exist before the 1970s, because people didn't care about that stuff so much. Then you started to hear the advice from dietitians: oh, you should eat 6 small meals a day. It's like, okay, prior to 1970s, nobody ate 6 meals a day. At no time in history did anybody eat 6 times a day, as opposed to eating 3 meals a day, natural foods. And if you want to sort of push it, well, you can skip a meal. Because remember, in the 1970s, if you were a naughty boy, you got sent to your bed without dinner. You basically fasted for 20 hours from noon until
That's a good
breakfast
point.
the next day.
Yeah.
And nobody died. Nobody had any problems, right? It was fine. Yes, you're a little hungry, and hopefully you learned your lesson. But that was it. That was it. So if you wanted to lose weight, you could simply change one of these levers and say, you know what, I can fast, because if I don't eat, what's going to happen? Well, my body is going to be forced to use the calories that have been stored, which is body fat. That's perfect.
If the approach to eating has proven effective through time, it is likely sound advice. In the 1970s in the USA, there was plenty of food and no obesity. Why? What did they do differently then? The big change in 1977 was the government's advice to eat a low-fat diet. The graph shows that beginning in 1980, the rise in U.S. overweight obesity coincided with the beginning of the dietary guidelines. Eat less fat is equivalent to saying eat more carbohydrates. Bread, rice, potatoes, as much as 7 to 11 servings per day. That was the guideline. If we simply go back to eating the traditional way, we can regain the effortless way of maintaining good weight. Low-fat diets were the big change in the 1970s. Prior to that, throughout history, we ate fat, cheese, eggs. We ate 3 times a day. By 2004, with this big change from the government guidelines, we were eating 6 times a day. Breakfast, then a snack. Lunch, then a snack. Dinner, then a snack. Low-fat diets were the big change in the 1970s. We had changed what we ate to low-fat. And when we ate 6 times a day, these led to overall obesity increases. These two things are related: what we eat and when we eat. If we eat steak and eggs, we won't be hungry for hours. If we eat white bread and jam, we will be ravenous in a short time, looking for a muffin. Dr. Fung's suggestion: let's go back to a 1970s style of eating. It is what people had always eaten: natural foods, including the fat. Beginning in the 1970s, dietitians' advice was eat 6 meals a day. But at no time in history did anyone eat 6 meals a day. And if, like everyone before the 1970s, you can easily skip a meal, like a naughty boy is sent to bed without dinner, he is essentially fasting for 20 hours with no harm. So if you wanted to lose weight, just fast. What will happen? Your body will burn body fat.